The State of Rugby in New Zealand, an investigation into the issues facing the sport, a year out from the Rugby World Cup. The fate and the state of the amateur game.
Club rugby's become the fourth rung on the ladder in a three-tier professional system. Rugby is the only true amateur part of it, and it's struggled as a result. I mean, the idea of seeing All Blacks or top players playing club rugby is virtually gone.
It's the amateur game where communities participate, the clubs, and club rugby goes on as it always has. Lots of enthusiasm, lots of kids, lots of volunteers. Lots of community spirit and socialising, and I think we all realise that the game is two-tiered now.
There are tensions between the amateur and the professional game. We are probably one of the few sports in the world where you keep the two elements of the game together in single organisation, so that we have to balance our resources, our thinking, our energy and our money between the two. We think it's to the best interest of community rugby, because in the end it's the professional game that generates the money. Take that money and then reinvest it in the community game, and if you like, you kind of feed the machine. So we think club rugby is really important. We really want to see a window dedicated for club rugby. We want players chosen out of club rugby for the Air New Zealand Cup, be it Division 1 or Premier level.
I think club rugby has basically got over it and about, okay, we are definitely a feeder system to provincial rugby. And what the clubs do with their little sneaky little deals when they get a guy from one club to the other, that's okay. But it's supposed to be an amateur, right? And then that's okay. They've understood that. As long as they get just a clear number of weeks to play their competition, their club competition, and the representative team doesn't start dragging guys out, that is the only annoyance. They just want a nice, clear competition period of time to play our game. Then we all go on the piss. And we're going to watch you guys, get beaten up by, you go and beat, we're going to follow you guys. But don't muck around with our competition. It's only a short competition, and we just want to be left alone. You can have all our players, our best players, a bigger rep team afterwards, which is fair.
No, I think we need to look after the amateur game. We need to look after the grassroots of the game. We need to be able to put some money into that area of the game so the clubs and the schools that are the backbone of the game in this country are always developing. And if we do that, we're going to be in good shape at a professional level. If we ignore that, we're going to destroy the game that we love, and I think that's important. Like a lot of us a lot of young Kiwis have had marvellous advantages of playing for their local club and their local school and enjoying that experience, and I think that's very important.
But it caters for young and old. The old supporters who've been there a long time still get great enjoyment about coming down to the club on a Saturday, watching their team perform. And, excuse me, and they've still got a really meaningful part to play. There's a lot of respect in clubs for what has gone before, and the old fellas have paved the way. They used to play, they've coached, they've managed, they've administered the game. And I think young people respect that fact.
Well, it's about older generation who've been loyal to a club for a long time, who'll still rather pop down to the local park and watch the team and have a community involvement.
I've always been a club person. And I pretty much prefer to watch club rugby. I think there's a vast difference between, in my opinion these days, there's two games of rugby. There's the professional game and the amateur game. And what's played out here on a Saturday afternoon is completely different to what's played in town at AMI Stadium. I suppose at the end of the day, those jokers have got all day to train. These jokers are just like I was 30 years ago. They got an hour and a half or 2 hours Tuesday and Thursday, and that's it. I think the fact that a lot of players now at the grassroots level know a lot of the professional players as well. They also see that they'd say, well, why should I bother going training? I'm not getting paid. And I think that's created such a great distance between the two games, if you like.
Oh, no, I think we've got to listen to people in the community game, because that's where it all starts. That's the base of the game. That's where the players come from. So we've got to be careful that we don't just say, well, we know better because we're running the professional game. Well, in actual fact, we're also running the amateur game. So we've got to have an empathetic, sympathetic and listening approach to those issues. But there are tough decisions, there are balancing calls to be made, and often I say to our team quite often, look, we haven't pleased anyone with that decision, so that's probably about right.
You have to have some way of being able to financially exist. You have to be able to buy the jerseys, and it used to be things that you could sell in a rugby club. You could sell a ticket to a spectator, you can't anymore. You used to be able to sell a bottle of beer over the bar. That's very difficult with the way that the social life and drink driving and such as occurred. You used to be able to advertise a little advertisement in a program or on the side of the field. You can't do that now. You used to be able to sell a subscription to a player, a club member, and that's very difficult these days. So there were a whole lot of ways that clubs used to be able to gather finance, even chook raffles or things like that, and they're even now hard to sell. So what can you sell? If you can't sell something, you can't exist. And so we don't have means of funding clubs, and I think lower grade NPC teams are finding this as well. But it doesn't mean to say they can't play the game well. There's still some great players going to come out of that area and have to come out of that area if the All Black game needs to be continues.
And still we just haven't found that balance right, from switching over from amateur to professionalism. And unfortunately, however, club rugby has failed, and it's just not, it doesn't bring the same excitement like it used to, And I remember when I was playing club for Ponsonby and anything from the quarterfinals in, you had heaps of people turning up. The public turned up to support their respective clubs. And I think a lot of that had to do with the All Blacks were able to play in their respective clubs as well. And this was the same with provincials when they were playing for the NPCs. The All Blacks were available to play.
I'd like to think that hundreds of people watched club rugby when I played, and in reality they didn't. Mum and dad and occasionally a couple of flatmates. But it's not bad to have that view of it because it keeps us anchored. There's a lot to be taken from the history in New Zealand, and I think we've seen it this year with the resurgence of interest in the New Zealand Cup. Very parochial, very provincial based, and we're seeing great support actually in the provincial unions as opposed to the big cities. So there's a lesson for us there, and there's no doubt about that, and we have to be very careful while we manage this change not to lose too much from that. But I keep coming back to it. There are only so many weeks in the year. There's only so much money to go around, and we've got to be very careful how we balance out all the demands.
Parochial sort of provincial country stuff, it always makes the blood run, and sometimes the standard's not that good, but as long as the passion's there, it's good stuff. A lot of these places, if you take rugby away, it sort of destroys part of the fabric, and they need that to. It's still the sort of the centre of a lot of the country activities. And of course it's very important we keep this going, because if you actually look at the All Blacks today even, there's a heck of a lot of those guys have come from some pretty obscure places. So it's very important we keep the game going in these areas. I mean, take Richie McCaw, Dan Carter, go to the top of the tree. They're both boys from rural areas. And, we must preserve that.
I have liked this year the fact that a few of the All Blacks have actually played. My son plays at Christchurch, and when Richie McCaw came back and played, it was really good for everybody who's played with him and against him, and I think that's a good thing. I think some of the hierarchy in the NZRFU may be getting a little bit away from the grassroots and the club rugby.
I remember going up to the far north 2 or 3 years ago, and we did a show up there for Grassroots Rugby, and going out to the Bay of Islands with at a highway, we walked into the grounds, and there was an old Māori guy was doing the hangi with his overalls on, and I went over and had a chat. And then later on in the day, when the speeches were made, here was the same guy dressed up in his club jacket and tie, and he was making the speeches. He was the president. So, I mean, that's how country sort of stuff works. I mean, you get these blokes, and every club's got one or two real stalwarts that keep it going, volunteers, and that's the only way that's the only way that rugby will survive, with volunteers. So very, very important, and it's the same all over New Zealand.
Yeah, I think if rugby really wants the people to come back to it, to embrace it like we once truly did, it has to change first. It has to embrace the people. You know, it can't just stand at the top of the hill and say, why aren't you turning up? Come up.